May 8, 1944. Over the skies of Braunschweig, Germany, at 28,000 feet, the thin air crystallized into vapor trails as American bombers pushed toward their target. Major Hans Diehl of Jägerschwader 1, with 23 confirmed kills painted on his Focke-Wulf 190's fuselage, smiled confidently as he led his squadron toward the incoming B-17s. He was certain that the flimsy American fighter escorts would scatter like leaves in the wind when faced with the Luftwaffe's elite. Little did he know that within 48 hours, his entire understanding of aerial warfare would be shattered along with his aircraft. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how industrial might translated into mechanical superiority, and how a chance encounter between two pilots, one buoyed by propaganda, the other by engineering reality, would demonstrate the turning tide of air superiority in the European theater. The morning briefing at RAF Boxted in Essex, England, had been tense. Lieutenant Michael Hawk Harrison of the 56th Fighter Group, 61st Fighter Squadron, listened intently as Colonel Hubert Zemke outlined the mission. The 56th, known as Zemke's Wolf Pack, had built a fearsome reputation, but their losses had been mounting. Today they would escort the 8th Air Force's B-17s on a bombing run over Braunschweig's aircraft factories. "Gentlemen," Colonel Zemke said, his voice cutting through the cigarette smoke hanging in the briefing room. "Intelligence reports heavy Luftwaffe presence in the target area. Their fighters are desperate to protect these factories. Remember, your P-47s can take punishment that would tear a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf to pieces. Use that to your advantage." Captain Thomas Wilson, Harrison's flight leader, leaned over. "The crowd still think our planes are inferior. Their aces call our Thunderbolts flying milk bottles because of the shape. They don't understand what we've built." Harrison nodded. At 24 years of age, with 7 confirmed kills, he had complete faith in his Republic P-47D Thunderbolt. While many pilots preferred the sleeker, longer-ranged P-51 Mustangs that were increasingly dominating the skies, Harrison loved the rugged dependability of the Thunderbolt. Weighing 17,500 pounds fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of the Focke-Wulf 190A, the P-47 had earned the nickname Jug for its bulky appearance. But that bulk concealed its greatest asset, survivability. Meanwhile, 500 miles away at Luftwaffe Airfield Wunstorf, Major Hans Diehl addressed his pilots with equal confidence. The son of a World War I flying ace, Diehl had been raised on stories of German air superiority. At 31, he represented the Luftwaffe's experienced cadre, those who had cut their teeth in the Spanish Civil War and the early Blitzkrieg campaigns. "The Americans are sending their bombers again," he told his squadron, gesturing to the map. "And with them, their P-47s. Remember what we know about these aircraft. They are heavy, underarmed, and built by a nation of factory workers, not craftsmen. Their planes are made of tin compared to German engineering. One good burst from your 20mm cannons will tear them apart." Feldwebel Kurt Muller, a young pilot with only 2 missions behind him, raised his hand. "But Major, I heard their engines are very powerful." Diehl dismissed the concern with a wave. "The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 is impressive on paper. 2,000 horsepower, yes. But power means nothing without finesse. Our BMW 801D engine produces 1,700 horsepower in a lighter, more maneuverable airframe. German precision will always triumph over American mass production." What Diehl didn't mention was the growing shortage of aviation fuel that limited training for new pilots, or the fact that experienced Luftwaffe pilots were increasingly being lost without adequate replacements. The Luftwaffe had begun the war with the finest trained pilots in the world, with many having over 500 hours of flight time. By 1944, new German pilots often entered combat with less than 180 hours. American pilots, conversely, typically received 400 hours of training before deployment. As both squadrons prepared for takeoff, the material differences between them were stark. Harrison's P-47D, Big Betsy, named after his mother, had been manufactured just 3 months earlier at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant in New York. The factory was producing P-47s at a rate of 300 per month in early 1944. Across all American plants, 16 aircraft rolled off production lines every hour, more than Germany produced in an entire day. Harrison ran his hand along the Thunderbolt's aluminum skin as ground crew completed final checks. The P-47D featured 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. With 425 rounds per gun, the P-47 carried more ammunition than any other American fighter. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp radial engine was protected by a complex array of armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a rugged airframe designed to absorb tremendous punishment. "She'll bring you home, Lieutenant," said Technical Sergeant James Murphy, Harrison's crew chief. "This bird's got enough metal to stop anything short of a direct hit from a cannon shell." In contrast, Major Deal's Focke-Wulf FW-190A-8 represented the pinnacle of German fighter design, sleek, agile, and deadly in the hands of an experienced pilot. But closer inspection revealed the compromises forced by wartime shortages. The newer aluminum alloys once used had been replaced with more standard alternatives due to critical material shortages. Some components that had once been machined from solid blocks were now fabricated from pressed sheet metal. "The fuel is mixed correctly?" Deal asked his ground crew chief, Oberfeldwebel Werner Schmidt. "Yes, Herr Major, though it's the new synthetic blend. Not as clean-burning as the Romanian oil we used to get." Deal nodded grimly. The synthetic fuel produced from coal by Germany's advanced chemical industry was a testament to German ingenuity, but it was also a sign of desperation as Allied bombing cut off access to natural petroleum sources. The fuel often caused maintenance issues, reduced engine life, and occasionally led to power loss at critical moments. At 0730 hours, Harrison's squadron took off from RAF Boxstead, 16 P-47s climbing into the early morning sky. Each aircraft carried a 108-gallon drop tank under the belly and 75-gallon tanks under each wing, extending their range to escort the bombers all the way to the target and back. This was a recent innovation. Earlier in the war, American fighters had been forced to turn back halfway to the target, leaving bombers vulnerable to Luftwaffe interceptors. "Wolf Pack, this is lead. Form up and maintain radio discipline." Captain Wilson's voice crackled over the radio. Harrison eased his Thunderbolt into formation as the ground fell away. Below them, the English countryside was a patchwork of green fields and villages, still shrouded in morning mist. At 10,000 feet, they rendezvoused with the bomber stream, 72B, 17 flying fortresses from the 3rd Bombardment Division, their aluminum bodies gleaming in the morning sunlight. At approximately the same time, Deal led 12 FW-190s into the air from Wunstorf. They climbed quickly to 25,000 feet, where they would wait for the incoming bomber formation. The FW-190s carried a mixed armament, two 13mm MG-131 machine guns mounted above the engine, and four 20mm MG-151 cannons in the wings. This formidable firepower could tear through a bomber's aluminum skin with ease, but ammunition was limited to about 7 seconds of continuous fire. Remember, Deal instructed his pilots, attack from the front quarter if possible. The Americans hate head-on attacks. And watch for the fighter escorts. Hit them first if you can. As the American bombers crossed the Dutch coast at 1,025 hours, German radar stations tracked their progress and vectored interceptors to meet them. The air war had become a deadly chess match. American planners chose targets carefully, balancing strategic importance against expected resistance and losses. German commanders tried to husband their dwindling fighter force, committing planes only when targets were vital. Harrison checked his instruments as they crossed into German airspace. Oil pressure normal. Fuel flow steady. Oxygen flowing through his mask. The P-47's cockpit was spacious compared to other fighters, with excellent visibility except directly to the rear. He scanned the sky constantly, knowing that in aerial combat, the pilot who spotted the enemy first usually survived. "Bandits, 2 o'clock high." The call came over the radio. Harrison looked up to see the contrails of approaching German fighters against the deep blue sky. Wolf Pack, this is lead. Blue and red flights, stay with the bombers. White and yellow flights, climb to engage. Harrison was in yellow flight. He pushed his throttle forward and pulled back on the stick. The P-47 responded with a surge of power, climbing toward the incoming threat. The Thunderbolt wasn't as nimble as the FW-190 in level flight, but its tremendous power gave it exceptional climb rates at high altitude. Major Deal spotted the American formation and immediately recognized the escorting P-47s by their distinctive silhouette. 12 o'clock, Thunderbolts climbing to meet us, he radioed to his squadron. Remember, they dive well, but turn poorly. Force them into a turning fight. The two formations closed at a combined speed of nearly 600 miles per hour. Harrison's heart pounded as he armed his guns. The German fighters grew from specks to recognizable shapes in seconds. Yellow flight, break right on my mark, ordered Lieutenant Colonel Robert Johnson, the flight leader and one of the top American aces. 3, 2, 1 break. Harrison hauled his stick right as the German fighters flashed past. The 17,500-pound Thunderbolt responded more sluggishly than the nimble 9,000-pound Focke-Wulfs. But Harrison had anticipated this, beginning his turn early. He caught a glimpse of a FW-190 with distinctive yellow nose markings. Deal's aircraft, though Harrison didn't know it then. Deal had spotted Harrison's slight lag in the turn. Schwarm 2, follow me. We have a straggler, he called, banking his fighter around in a tight turn that the heavier P-47 couldn't match. Harrison saw the trap developing and did what Thunderbolt pilots were trained to do when outmaneuvered. He dived. The P-47 dropped like a stone, quickly accelerating past 400 miles per hour. The FW-190s followed, but their controls stiffened at high speeds, while the P-47's hydraulically boosted control surfaces remained responsive. At 20,000 feet, Harrison abruptly pulled back on his stick, using the Thunderbolt's energy to zoom climb back toward the fight. The maneuver caught Feldwebel Müller by surprise. The young German pilot tried to follow but overcorrected, his FW-190 buffeting as it approached a stall. Harrison seized the opportunity, rolling in behind the struggling German fighter. He pressed the trigger on his control column, sending a burst from his 8.50 caliber machine guns. The heavy bullets tore into the FW-190's right wing, shredding metal and igniting fuel. Müller managed to bail out as his aircraft spiraled toward the ground. Major Deal witnessed his subordinate's aircraft disintegrating and felt a flash of anger. He sliced his FW-190 through the melee, spotting Harrison's P-47 as it completed its attack run. With expert precision, Deal maneuvered onto the Thunderbolt's tail. Harrison sensed rather than saw the danger. He stomped on the right rudder pedal and yanked the stick, throwing the Thunderbolt into a vicious skid that spoiled Deal's aim. The Germans' cannon shells passed harmlessly beneath Harrison's aircraft. The two pilots entered a complex dance of thrust, gravity, and lift, each trying to force the other into a vulnerable position. Deal's greater experience showed as he repeatedly worked his way into firing position, only for Harrison to use the P-47's power and ruggedness to escape. After one particularly tight turn, Deal managed to get directly behind Harrison at a distance of about 200 yards, point-blank range in aerial combat. He triggered a burst from his cannons, and several 20mm shells struck the P-47's tail section. Inside his cockpit, Harrison felt the impacts as dull thuds. Warning lights flickered on his instrument panel, but the controls still responded. The Thunderbolt shuddered but kept flying. Any other fighter might have disintegrated under such a direct hit, but the P-47's robust construction absorbed the damage. Deal couldn't believe what he was seeing. He keyed his radio, broadcasting on the open channel in English. "Your planes are made of tin, American. Next time I will not miss." Harrison was surprised to hear the German's voice. Most aerial combat was conducted in silence, with only terse updates between squadron mates. He didn't respond verbally, but he did react. Instead of continuing to evade, Harrison chopped his throttle suddenly and deployed his landing flaps momentarily. The P-47 decelerated so quickly that Deal overshot, suddenly finding their positions reversed. Now it was Harrison's turn to press the attack. He fired a sustained burst from his 8 Brownings. The .50 caliber bullets might have lacked the explosive power of cannon shells, but they made up for it in volume and velocity. Over 100 rounds struck Diehl's aircraft in less than 2 seconds, concentrating on the right wing root and engine cowling. The Germans' FW-190 shuddered as bullets penetrated its thinner armor. The BMW engine began streaming glycol coolant and oil. Most critically, several rounds severed the main spar of the right wing. Under the stress of combat maneuvering, the wing folded upward with catastrophic results. Diehl fought his disintegrating aircraft, managing to jettison the canopy and bail out at approximately 15,000 feet. His parachute deployed successfully, and he watched in disbelief as pieces of his fighter fell around him like metallic confetti. Harrison circled once to confirm his kill and checked that the German pilot had survived, then climbed back toward the main battle. His P-47 was damaged but flyable, exactly as its designers had intended. The Thunderbolt had been conceived from the beginning as a survivable weapons platform, trading agility for durability and firepower. The air battle continued for another 20 minutes. The Luftwaffe fighters, outnumbered and increasingly outclassed, broke off the engagement after destroying 3 B-17s and damaging 7 others. The cost had been high. 5 FW-190s shot down, with only 2 American P-47s lost. The bombers continued to their target, dropping 186 tons of high explosives on the Braunschweig aircraft factories with devastating accuracy. Major Hans Diehl landed in a field near Hanover, his ankle twisted from the hard landing. He was quickly recovered by local Wehrmacht troops and transported to a field hospital. As doctors treated his minor injuries, Diehl reflected on the encounter with growing unease. The American plane had absorbed direct hits from his cannons, yet remained flyable. His own aircraft, despite representing the pinnacle of German engineering, had been torn apart by the Americans' guns. 3 days later, after being debriefed by Luftwaffe intelligence officers, Diehl was invited to tour a nearby aircraft factory. The invitation came from General Lieutenant Adolf Galland himself, the general of fighters, who was concerned about increasing pilot reports of American technical superiority. The factory floor was a scene of controlled chaos. Workers assembled FW-190s at various stations, but the process was far from smooth. Parts shortages meant that some aircraft sat incomplete for days. Skilled workers had been conscripted into the Wehrmacht, replaced by forced laborers from occupied territories who worked under armed guard. "We produce 15 FW-190s per week at this facility," explained the factory director, Herr Keller. "Before the war, with the same number of workers, we could produce 25. And the Americans?" Diehl asked. Keller hesitated, glancing at Galland, who nodded permission. "Intelligence estimates that Republic Aviation produces 75 P-47s per week at their main factory alone. They have multiple factories." The numbers were staggering. Diehl had been aware that American production was substantial, but the scale still shocked him. This wasn't just a matter of quantity, though. His recent combat experience suggested quality differences as well. "The armor on these fighters," Diehl said, running his hand along the fuselage of a partially completed FW-190. "Has it been reduced?" The factory director looked uncomfortable. "We've had to make adjustments due to material shortages. The armor plate is 2 millimeters thinner than in the 1942 specifications, and some components that were previously machined from duralumin are now pressed steel." Galland interjected. "It's not just materials, Hans. The Americans designed their aircraft differently. The P-47 uses a radial engine with extensive armor protection. They expect their planes to take hits and return. We've always emphasized agility and firepower, believing that avoiding hits is preferable to absorbing them. But when everyone has radar, avoiding detection becomes impossible," Diehl said quietly. "And their pilots are improving." 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Harrison was summoned to 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe. His encounter with the FW-190 had been noted because of the unusual radio communication from the German pilot. Intelligence officers wanted his assessment of the engagement. "The Thunderbolt performed exactly as advertised, sir," Harrison told Colonel Richard Hewlett of intelligence. I took at least three 20mm hits to the tail section, but all critical systems remained functional. The German pilot seemed genuinely surprised when his cannon fire failed to bring me down. Hewlett nodded, making notes. We've been tracking this particular German squadron. Their commander, Major Deal, is, or was, something of a propaganda figure for the Luftwaffe. Veteran of the Spanish Civil War, Knight's Cross recipient. The kind of pilot they feature in their newsreels. He was good, Harrison acknowledged. Probably the most skilled opponent I've faced. But good piloting couldn't overcome the technical differences between our aircraft. That's precisely what we're seeing across the theater, Hewlett said. The production statistics tell the story. By May 1944, American factories had delivered over 70,000 fighter aircraft since Pearl Harbor. Germany has produced fewer than 40,000 since the war began, and they're fighting on multiple fronts. The statistics were indeed telling. The United States had not only outproduced Germany, but had done so while simultaneously supplying the Soviet Union and Great Britain through the Lend-Lease program. In 1943 alone, American factories produced more aviation gasoline than Germany had manufactured since the beginning of the war. This industrial might translated directly into combat capability. By spring 1944, the 8th Air Force could put over 1,000 bombers and 900 fighters into the air for a single mission, a display of power that the Luftwaffe could no longer effectively counter. Major Deal experienced this reality firsthand during his recovery. From the hospital windows, he watched as American bombers passed overhead day after day. The Luftwaffe response grew increasingly anemic as fuel shortages and pilot losses took their toll. German cities that had once been protected by formidable anti-aircraft defenses and fighter squadrons now lay virtually defenseless. On June 4, 1944, 2 days before the Normandy landings, Deal was deemed fit to return to duty. He was surprised to receive orders transferring him to a training unit near Munich rather than back to his frontline squadron. "We need experienced instructors more than we need combat pilots," explained Oberst Weber, who delivered the orders. "The Führer has approved production of the Me-262 jet fighter. Once these enter service in significant numbers, we will regain control of the skies." Deal understood the subtext. His very survival had become valuable. Experienced pilots were now too rare to risk in daily combat. This realization was perhaps more demoralizing than his defeat. The Luftwaffe had shifted from an offensive force to a defensive one, and was now transitioning to a preservative posture, husbanding its dwindling resources for a technological salvation that seemed increasingly unlikely to materialize in time. At his new posting, Deal was dismayed by the quality of the trainees. Teenagers with minimal flight experience were being rushed through abbreviated training courses, often with less than 120 total flying hours before combat deployment. Fuel shortages meant that simulator time replaced actual flying for many critical skills. The contrast with the pre-war Luftwaffe, where pilots received extensive training before combat, was stark. "They will die in their first engagement," Deal told his fellow instructor, Major Hoffman, as they watched cadets practicing in worn-out training aircraft. "Perhaps," Hoffman replied. "But what choice do we have? American bombing has reduced aircraft production by 30% in the last 3 months. They're systematically destroying our ability to fight." The conversation was interrupted by the drone of heavy engines. Both men looked up to see a formation of B-17s escorted by P-51 Mustangs, the latest American fighter to dominate the skies over Germany. The bombers were heading toward Munich, virtually unopposed. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Harrison had flown 15 more missions since his encounter with Deal. The nature of the air war had changed dramatically. Where once the Luftwaffe had risen in force to challenge every bombing raid, now they appeared selectively, husbanding strength for critical targets. "It's almost disappointing," Captain Wilson commented during a briefing in late July. "We fly all the way to Berlin and sometimes don't see a single enemy fighter." "They're still out there," Colonel Zemke cautioned. "Intelligence says they're saving fuel and pilots for a big push, possibly with their new jet fighters." The Me-262 had indeed begun limited operations, but too late and in too few numbers to change the war's trajectory. By August 1944, Allied forces had broken out of Normandy, Paris was liberated, and the Soviets were driving toward the German border from the east. The Luftwaffe fought on, but increasingly as isolated pockets of resistance rather than a coordinated air force. In September 1944, Major Diehl received an unexpected visitor at the training base, General Lieutenant Galland, who arrived in a staff car escorted by SS guards. "Walk with me, Hans," Galland said after the formalities were complete. They strolled along the perimeter of the airfield, out of earshot of others. "I've been relieved of my command," Galland said without preamble. "Göring blames me for the failure of the Luftwaffe to stop the Allied bombing." Diehl was shocked, but not entirely surprised. The Reich leadership had increasingly turned to scapegoating when faced with military reversals. "What happens now?" he asked. "I've been authorized to form a special fighter unit, Jagdverband 44. Elite pilots, flying the Me-262. Our last chance to make a difference." Galland paused. "I want you to join us." The offer was tempting. The Me-262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, could outrun any Allied fighter. But Diehl had seen too much to believe in miracle weapons. "Even if the Me-262 is everything promised, how many can we field? 50? 100? The Americans sent nearly 2,000 aircraft against Dresden last week." Galland didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "This isn't about winning anymore, Hans. It's about showing what German pilots can do, given the right equipment. It's about honor." Diehl considered this. When the FW-190 first entered service in 1941, it outclassed everything the Allies had. "We thought German engineering would always maintain that edge. But we were wrong. It wasn't about having the best individual aircraft. It was about having enough good aircraft." "The P-47 that shot you down," Galland said. "You reported that it absorbed direct cannon hits without falling." "Yes, their planes aren't made of tin, as we like to believe. They're overbuilt, designed to bring pilots home even when damaged. And they have enough pilots and planes that they can afford to prioritize survival over performance." Galland nodded slowly. "So you won't join us?" "I didn't say that," Diehl replied. "I'll fly the 262, but with no illusions about changing the outcome." Across the Atlantic, the machinery of American production continued at full capacity despite the increasingly favorable war situation. In Farmingdale, New York, Republic Aviation completed its 10,000th P-47 Thunderbolt in September 1944. The company had expanded from 1,200 employees in 1939 to nearly 20,000. Similar stories played out across the American aviation industry, from Boeing in Seattle to North American in California. Lieutenant Harrison, promoted to captain after completing 35 missions, was sent home in October 1944 as part of the rotation policy. At Republic's main plant, he was invited to speak to workers about his combat experiences. "The planes you build here saved my life," he told an assembly of factory workers, many of them women who had entered the workforce during the war. When that German ace said our planes were made of tin, he couldn't have been more wrong. The Thunderbolt is a flying tank, and every rivet you install, every weld you make, every inspection you complete makes sure another pilot comes home. After the war, both men adjusted to civilian life. Harrison returned to college on the GI Bill, eventually becoming an aerospace engineer with Northrop. Diehl, after 18 months in an Allied POW camp, found work as a test pilot for the reborn German aviation industry in the 1950s. In 1967, at an international air show in Paris, the two men met by chance. Harrison recognized Diehl from a magazine article featuring former Luftwaffe aces. After initial awkwardness, they found themselves comparing notes over drinks at the hotel bar. "Your Thunderbolt," Diehl said. "It was the first time I realized we were fighting not just American pilots, but American factories. When my cannons hit your aircraft, and it kept flying, that was when I knew the war was lost." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "We were told the P-47 could absorb punishment that would destroy other fighters, but you don't really believe it until you experience it. I took those hits and still made it home with hydraulics intact and only minor control issues." "The irony," Diehl said, "is that before the war, we thought mass production meant inferior quality. German craftsmanship versus American assembly lines. But your mass-produced aircraft were actually more robustly engineered than our hand-finished ones. Different design philosophies, Harrison agreed. You built precision instruments. We built farm equipment, simple, reliable, easy to mass produce and repair. As they parted, Deal offered his hand. Your planes weren't made of tin after all. Harrison shook the offered hand. No, and neither was German fighting spirit made of hot air. Different tools for different tasks, but the men who flew them were cut from the same cloth. The encounter between Major Hans Deal and Lieutenant Michael Harrison represented more than a personal duel. It symbolized the clash between two industrial philosophies, German craftsmanship versus American mass production. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, with its rugged construction and overwhelming firepower, embodied the American approach to warfighting, substituting material abundance for the skilled scarcity that had characterized earlier conflicts. By war's end, American factories had produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, more than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. This industrial miracle, more than any tactical or strategic brilliance, determined the outcome of the air war and, ultimately, the conflict itself. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.